Hello and welcome to this CrazyTalk Animator 3 tutorial on how to create your first compound prop with the new PSD pipeline workflow. So in the past, when you wanted to create a compound prop, like this camera prop here that I'm going to play right now, this compound prop is basically a collection of individual elements. These are different images and sprites that I've brought in as individual props. So all of these have been united to create this camera through all these individual items. Now the advantage is that you can grab all these items and you could scale them individually, you can rotate them individually, and obviously you can set in keyframes for them. So we've got two processes. In the past, you would have to import and save each individual sprite on its own and then attach it to a dummy. Now with the new PSD workflow, we have a streamlined process on how to do this. So before I go into that, I want to show you how it was done before. I would have to go to Create Media and then Import Prop. And I would have to manually import every single prop one at a time. So as you can imagine, all these props, when you put them united, they would create or simulate a compound prop. So once I had all these items inside my scene manager, I would have to save each individual sprite into my content manager's content library, because I then would have to put them under the structure of one dummy prop. And I'll show you that right now. So first we would have to save each one of these props in the content manager. I would have to rename them, and it would take a bit of time because obviously the more props that you have, the more you have to import, and then the more you would have to save into the content manager. So you would go out throughout this process, and depending on the amount of sprites, that would take some time. So right after I would have all my props in, and they're saved in the content library, the best idea would be to clear everything up and bring in a dummy prop. This would sometimes just be a transparent PNG. So I can assemble everything under that same structure. So here I have that PNG already, that dummy parent, and then I would go into the content manager to the library and manually bring in all these previously saved elements so that I could create that compound prop. And then obviously once I had this prop or all these elements fitted onto this dummy prop, then I would have to animate them. Now there's a quicker way how we can do this. And with our PSD pipeline, what you can do is just bring in all these elements as different layers inside your PSD editor. This can be Photoshop or any other tool that allows you to work with PSD files in different layers and with different folder names. So I can turn these on and off so you can understand the structure of the camera. It depends on how you want to create your prop, right? So the advantage this way is that with this PSD pipeline workflow, I can save this PSD file. I can just save it as camera. Let me go out here quickly. I'll save this as camera, and then inside of CrazyTalk Animator 3, I open a new project, and I can import that PSD file, bring it in as a prop. And then when I bring that PSD file in, I will already have that dummy structure, that parent structure created for me. You'll see that automatically CrazyTalk Animator 3 will have that dummy, and it'll put all the individual elements under that dummy parent. So it's a quicker way to do things. So you could see that I have all my elements inside, and they're all under the main, the root dummy parent that will allow me to control. Now the advantage of this is that I can grab the dummy parent here and I can scale this, and this will scale everything at the same time, and I can rotate it and do everything else I need to do without having to move each individual item manually. So this is a great time saver. So what else could we do? With all these sprites inside, sometimes I would want to add another sprite. Let's say for the lens here. I want to simulate, let's say, me taking a picture. So I want to create as if my lens, I have a shutter animation inside, and I want to do this by switching one of the sprites inside. So it's actually very easy now with the PSD workflow. because I can create another image like this. So if I open the sprite editor, you'll see that in Aperture I only have one sprite or one image, right? So I can bring in another one to simulate as if I took a picture. So back in my PSD editor, what I want to do is I want to duplicate. The easiest way is just to duplicate the layer for the aperture, and then I'm going to color over it in gray. And that way I can have a secondary sprite, which I can switch out inside CrazyTalk Animator 3. So to do this, let me go to Aperture Layer here and duplicate that. Let's name this Aperture 2. And now with this secondary layer, I'm going to color over it. I'm going to find sort of a gray tone for this. That way we can simulate two different sprites. Okay, so let me go into my tool here on the left, go to the brush tool, and brush over that secondary layer, just about there. So I'm going to import this as another layer, and I'm going to add them together inside so I can have a secondary sprite. Now, how do I do this? How do I group these together? Well, it's very simple. All I have to do is open or create a folder group for both of these layers, for Aperture and Aperture 2. I want to put them both under one layer, and both under one folder, and that way CrazyTalk Animator knows that I want to group these for sprite changes. So let me create this folder and call it Aperture or whatever, and then I'll bring both of these layers, oh, not that one, hold up, the first one and the second one, and drop them into that folder. Okay, and now they're automatically grouped. So I can save this file, and I could reload it inside of CrazyTalk Animator 3, and you'll see that once I open the sprite editor again, we will have that secondary sprite layer inside. That sprite element, I'm sorry. So I'll go to Create Media here. We'll go to Prop. And where's my camera? Here we go. So this is the camera that I have, and if I click on that aperture there and I open the sprite editor, you'll see that now I have two sprites. And now that I have these two sprites, I can create an animation. I can have a sprite switch inside of the stage window. And I can work with a timeline to create keyframes for both of this. Okay, and obviously I can create keyframes for all the other elements that I have inside of my compound prop. So for right now, let's try to do this part here. I'm going to try to create keyframes for that aperture, and I'll show you how we could not just keyframe these sprite changes, but also how we can save it and add to the action menu later on. So what I'm going to do here is that I will select my camera prop. I'm going to open my prop key editor just to show you. All these are individual sprites, right? So I can move these about, I can scale them and rotate them and do anything I like. I can also play with the opacity for each individual sprite. So let me reset all, and I'm going to open the timeline with F3, and I will create an animation. I will create the first animation with the frame of my camera. I'm going to grab the black frame here, and I'm going to minimize that. And then I'm going to go to the end of my animation here and reset. So I just set a keyframe at the beginning and at the end. Okay. Now I can add a transition curve for that last one, just to make it look a bit more interesting. Gain momentum and damp. We have smooth. I think that should work. Okay, so we have that initial one. What about for the orange part? Now I can do an animation for this too. I'll go to the beginning. I'll scale this down, and I'll add a keyframe automatically. Then I'll go to the last frame, frame 30, and I'll reset, and that dropped in a keyframe for that frame 30, right? Then on that keyframe, let's see, I'm going to reset at the beginning again. So I'm adding a keyframe at the beginning and at the end, right there. And I want to make sure that that last one has a transition curve too. So I'll go transition curve, and I'll choose one. Let's say there's a bunch of them. Just hover over and you'll see all the different motions that you get. So I think I'll choose, well, you can choose any one of these if you like. Just trial and error by hovering over until you find something that suits you. Okay. So I think that once we selected this, I'm going to select both of these keyframes. Hold up, both of them. And I'm going to move them forward so that at the beginning we have a little pause. And then you'll see my camera move, right? Okay, that looks pretty nice. Let's close this transition curve here. But you'll notice there's still a line, a thin line for the orange part. So I want to get rid of this. What I can do is that I can go to that beginning of the beginning keyframe and I can drop the opacity at the very beginning. Drop the opacity to 0. That way we can make it invisible. And we don't see that line when we start. So I'll set a secondary a keyframe at the very beginning with opacity 0. And then we'll set a keyframe that makes it appear. And I think we're good. Right there. Now that looks pretty cool, right? Okay, so what else could we do? Well, I could simulate, remember that with the sprite that we brought in for the aperture, I can simulate an animation as if my camera is taking a picture. And this is actually very simple. The same way that I set keyframes with the camera frame, the camera body, I can do the same for the aperture. I would have to set a keyframe at the beginning and at the end, and probably one in the middle. So let's move the time scrub here to where I want that animation to start. I'll open the the sprite editor, and I'll add the initial sprite, which is it to appear, move the time scrub, add the secondary sprite, and then go back and add the first sprite again. So I have 3 keyframes. Okay, normal, shutter, and then normal again at the end. That's 3 keyframes. All right, I also want to sync the button of my camera. So I'll go to the button and set a keyframe with reset, move it forward, bring it down, and then move it forward again and reset. So I have 3 keyframes. So I have that little click, and it's synced with my aperture. All right, so it's very simple to follow. When you want to do something quick, that reset button is always helpful. So at the end, I get something like this. Very cool, right? Now you can select and copy all these animations and add them into your action menu, the action menu editor. And this is done fairly easily with the collect clip track. So inside the timeline, you go to where it says collect clip, and I open this track. Now inside the track, let me select from where. That's the range of my animation. So I'm inside the collect clip track. I'm going to drag, and then I'm going to right click inside. And then I'm going to have an option that says add to animation, to action menu. Okay, hold up, let me bring this up a bit. Okay, I have add to action menu and transfer to action menu. The difference is that when I add to action menu, it'll add all the keyframes, all the individual keyframes. But if I transfer to action menu, it'll compress, it'll put everything into one motion clip, and it'll add that motion clip. That's what I want to do. So let me name this. I'm going to call this action 1. And now you'll see that all the keyframes at the bottom disappeared. But I do have the motion that I saved, that animation I saved inside my dummy prop. I'm going to action menu, action 1. So that dummy parent has all of this animation saved. And you'll see that now I have a motion clip when I activated that. So with any motion clip, I could extend that, or I can compress that to make it look faster, or I can extend that to make it look slower. Right about there, make it look slow. I can also copy paste it over and over if I need to. So just like a standard motion clip, you have the freedom of playing with this. All right, so thank you for watching this tutorial, and this is how to create your first compound prop and how to add this, any animation, into your action menu. All right, thank you.